Welcome to Lead and Follow, a podcast that explores how great collaboration actually happens. I'm your host, Sharna Fabiano, author of the book Lead and Follow, The Dance of Inspired Teamwork. And I'm pleased to bring you the latest research, insights, and learning methods to help you work together better with the people around you. I help founders, solopreneurs, and new leaders become great at collaborating because I've seen how much more becomes possible when people integrate their ideas, perspectives, and strengths in a practical way. To learn more about coaching with me and for a one-time discount on your first session, go to sharnafabiano.com/coaching and enter the promo code podcast. The link is in the show notes. And now, here's the episode. Today I'm speaking with Dr. Kinsey Hansen. Kinsey is an associate professor at Angelo State University, where she serves as program coordinator for the Master of Arts in Administrative Leadership and teaches in the Student Development and Leadership program. She is part of the team that designed and launched ASU's Doctorate of Education in Transformative Leadership, contributing to its structure, curriculum development, and now serving as its dissertation chair. With a career spanning community college and university leadership, Kinsey brings both scholarly expertise and deep practitioner experience to her work. I'm very interested today to ask her about her research on the co-construction of psychological safety among leaders and followers in organizations, as well as the way that she's been integrating followership into her leadership courses. Kinsey, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks. I'm so excited to be here.
Me too. I'm excited you're here too. Before we dive into your research, I know that you attended both the 2024 Global Followership Conference in Glasgow and also the more recent one just last month, that's April 2026 in Brisbane, Australia. And I'd love to ask you about your experience at those conferences.
The Global Followership Conference is genuinely one of the best professional experiences I've had. And I attend several conferences. I would say typically at least one conference a year, but the last couple of years I've attended 2 or 3 conferences. And the Global Followership Conference is really rare. I'm afraid I'm not going to do it justice, but I'm going to do my best. So at most conferences, I find myself walking away from sessions thinking that was really interesting, but struggling to connect the narrative or the discussion within the workshop with what I can bring back to my students and to my work. At the Global Followership Conference, every session I attended left me thinking about what I was going to do differently. That's rare. I take a lot of notes in these sessions, and so I'll be scribbling my notes and thinking about not just my own practice, but what I wanted my students to know. How was I going to come back and bring what I learned and share that with them in the classroom as well as my research? And honestly, more than anything else, it's the people at the conference. There is something remarkable about being in a room full of people who are equally passionate about a topic that many of the professional world doesn't even know or have the language for yet. And so the conversations before and after the sessions, at lunch, as we're talking, they're as rich as the sessions themselves. The people are very generous, they're kind, they're curious and inclusive, and very, very serious about the work. So when you find your people like that, you want to keep coming back. Glasgow was wonderful, but Brisbane was even better. And I left thinking, this is work that matters. And honestly, that feeling is what keeps me coming back.
Wow. Well, thank you so much for that incredible endorsement. And I'll drop a note here for listeners because we have another conference coming up July 7th through 9th, 2026 at Indiana Wesleyan University. You can get those details at globalfollowership.com and join me there. At the Australia conference, you presented some preliminary research on the co-creation of psychological safety. That topic is really dear to my heart. You know, as a coach, even as a dance teacher, you know, as a human being, I feel like it's just it's like the foundation of everything that we do together, you know, as people, either at work or, you know, in our private lives. So what got you interested in that topic from your, you know, particular context?
Well, Honestly, it started with a little bit of frustration. My colleague, Dr. Gina Heap, and I, we collaborate on a lot of different projects, followership being one of our most passionate shared interests. And we kept finding ourselves having the same conversation, almost word for word, about how dominant the narrative was around psychological safety and how it places the responsibility on almost entirely on the leaders. And that framing isn't wrong exactly. And Amy Edmondson's work is foundational for a reason. But in practice, what tends to happen is that everyone below the leader is cast as a passive recipient. Leaders create safety and followers receive it. And if you're sitting in an organization where the leader isn't creating the safety, you're just waiting. You have no agency, no tools, no role to play. And I don't want that for myself, and I don't want that for my colleagues. I absolutely don't want that for my students. People who are actively exploring leadership, who are hungry to make a difference in their organizations, I can't look at them and say, find a good leader and hope for the best. Because what if they don't? What if the conditions are never quite right? And they won't be. Nothing is ever perfect. And so just waiting for perfect is its own kind of loss. So that bothered us both very deeply. And everything we know from the research from Kelly, from Shayla, from the growing body of work on leader and follower dynamics, it tells us that followers are not passive. They shape culture every single day through the choices that they make, the questions that they ask, the moments they speak up, or when they stay silent. And so Gina and I started asking, what would it look like to put followers back in the frame as active contributors to psychological safety? And I want to be really clear about something because this is where people sometimes misread the argument. We're not shifting the burden from leaders to followers. That would just be trading one incomplete story for another. What we're talking about is genuine co-creation, shared responsibility. Every person in the organization, regardless of title, has both the capacity and the opportunity to shape the culture that they work in. And that reframe became the presentation, and the presentation became the study, and it all worked at the same time.
I really love that you are so grounded in the real experience of frustration. One of my coaching mentors taught me that change comes from pain. And as hard as that is to accept on some days, I do often find it to be true. And also, once you say it, it's so obvious. We can't wait around for some perfect unicorn leader to make everything safe. That's just not real life. It doesn't happen that way. So I would love to hear about your study.
So we had 108 responses from entry-level individuals who were just entry-level employees at the organization, all the way up through executive leadership. It ranged in tenure from people that had just started this year, a year of experience, up to 15, 20 plus years of experience. And then different departments and team sizes. The survey went out to anyone full-time, faculty, staff, employee, whatever, within the university. The quantitative findings alone were very striking. The average score on our followership behavior scale, which was looking at things like followers actively looking for ways to improve work, contributing ideas, taking initiative, that was 3.81 out of 5. Meanwhile, the average score on our psychological safety scale was 3.14. So there's a meaningful gap there, and it tells us a story. But honestly, the open-ended qualitative responses are where the story really comes to life. And I wanted to share a few of those because I feel like they really resonate with anyone who's ever worked within an organization. So the highest rated single item on the entire survey was the comment, I care about the long-term success of this organization. And that mean score was 4.36. At the same time, the very lowest rated item was the comment, it's safe to take a risk in this organization, with the mean score of 2.68. So this tells us people care deeply and they don't feel safe. And then you read comments, some of the open comments like this one. I tend to remain silent because my perspective has not been solicited or valued in the past, even when I have shared it. It seems decisions are made for people in my position rather than in collaboration. That person is not disengaged. They've been taught that disengagement or their engagement doesn't matter. Another comment that that spoke to someone that prevented them from speaking up. They said, speaking up when one feels supportive and listened to, but staying silent when one knows admin will only provide lip service. That's not a followership problem. That's a co-creation failure. The follower knows exactly what to do. They just don't believe the environment will honor it. What was equally powerful was reading how clearly respondents understood the structural nature of this problem. One person wrote, psychological safety cannot exist without reciprocal leadership behavior. Followers can contribute, but sustainable safety requires leaders to demonstrate openness, competence, and support. That's the co-creation argument articulated by a mid-level employee in their own words. And then there's a comment I found both honest and a little heartbreaking. This comment states, I have not yet spoken up because I need to go up for tenure. That single sentence captures an entire structural reality that the safety to speak up is often unevenly distributed based on job security, positional power, and what you have to lose. So what also stood out to me was the number of people who identified a very specific barrier, one that we refer to as speak up and own it trap. So one respondent put it perfectly. If I could change one communication norm in my workplace, it would be the expectation that the person who identifies a problem or suggests an improvement automatically becomes responsible for solving it. When feedback consistently results in added workload for the person who speaks up, it can unintentionally discourage honest dialogue. Now, that comment is not a lack of psychological safety in the traditional sense. It's a tax on voice. It quietly trains people to stay silent. So reading all of this together, you have a workforce that is engaged, invested, and capable of sophisticated followership, but has learned through repeated experience to be very careful about when and whether to use it. So the question that drives our research is, what does it take to close the gap? Not just what leaders should do, though that matters enormously, but what all of us in every role can do differently to build the kind of environment where contribution is genuinely safe. That's the co-creation argument, and the data made it feel urgent in a way I didn't fully anticipate when we started this research in this survey. Another thing I really didn't anticipate was what happened the very first day of launching the survey, and this really shocked me, surprised me, and inspired me. I started receiving messages from employees, unprompted, sharing how much the survey meant to the employee themselves, describing the psychological safety struggles they were living, expressing genuine hope that research might lead to something. And just to be clear, this was an anonymous survey. They didn't have to reach out, but they were so invested, so hungry to feel heard, that they chose to identify themselves anyway by reaching out and sharing, and even thanking me and Gina for doing the research. So that really stopped me because it told me the gap was meaningful. We were not just measuring data points. For a lot of people, this is their daily reality, and they want someone to know. That's really stayed with me because I spend my days teaching people who are stepping into leadership roles or who are already in them. And I find myself bringing these responses into this work, into the work that I'm doing in a very personal way now. I think about these messages and what the employees are saying, and I ask my students, what if this was your organization? What if these were your colleagues, your direct reports, the people sitting in the meeting next to you every week feeling exactly this way and saying nothing? Would you know? And if you did know, what would you do about it? So those are questions I want my students to carry with them. It's not just an academic exercise, but as a genuine leadership responsibility. So this research really made me feel a need for urgency in a way that I was not expecting. And I think that's what good research is supposed to produce. And it's exciting. It creates a lot of different emotions at the same time, but I'm very hopeful and have loved diving in.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for sharing those. I also feel like I get frustrated, because of kind of what you're saying, that these blocks to psychological safety seem to be structural sometimes, like if I speak up, I'm going to, be punished or, sacrifice my, my career advancement, or no one cares anyway. It's never changed, and that's exhausting. Right. And so I wonder in, knowing all of that and with this new insight you have, how would you guide listeners of this episode, for example, to, practice co-creating safety, either from leadership or followership, knowing that it seems daunting sometimes from a structural point of view?
I love this question because I think that you would expect it to be a complicated, hard answer. And my answer is not going to be that complicated.
Oh, thank goodness. Thank goodness.
Right. I mean, there's hope and there's things to do. And as followers, we have such a powerful role, but it's knowing, what to do and how to use it. So for followers, I would start with what we call voice framing, which is simply learning to connect your contributions to shared goals rather than personal preferences. So framing a concern or an idea in terms of what is valuable to the team, what the organization cares about, and keeping that dialogue open, not framing it from a personal, like, this is my opinion, but based on how it relates to the organizational success or the team success. You're not challenging the leader personally, but you're trying to contribute to the mission. That's a skill that you can start practicing tomorrow. Second, ask one brave question a week, starting in low stakes moments. So we refer to this as courageous inquiry. Courageous inquiry is a muscle. And if you wait until the high stakes moment to use it, you won't have built the strength yet. But if you'll start practicing it at a small scale, build the habit, you add this muscle layer to where you start off with these safer questions, but then you can get into more complex, direct, whether it's, speaking up or asking questions. But it's that brave question and starting just small and moving up. And to add to that, I think it's also commending others for asking the hard question or sharing their viewpoint that is maybe opposite of the whole room. But by acknowledging and supporting the behaviors of others doing this, it can normalize that becomes the norm within the team or within the organization. So it becomes easier for everyone to speak up and ask questions. I think for leaders, and I really mean this very sincerely, the most powerful thing you can do is model followership in your own upward relationships. Every leader follows someone, whether it's a board, a supervisor, the values of the institution, or the trust of their team. So when direct reports watch leaders practice genuine followership, asking honest questions of your own leadership, admitting uncertainty, advocating upward on behalf of your team, then followers start to believe that safety is real and it's not just a statement on a wall, part of a mission or something vague. And for organizations, it's really simple to say, but a lot harder to do. And the most important thing is to align your stated values with your actual response to dissent. Because what teaches people whether it's safe to speak up or not isn't the mission statement. It's what happened to the last person that spoke up. So that's a couple of ideas of how to start making change and practicing techniques that would help create that co-constructed psychological safety.
Thank you, Kinsey. I feel so relieved because, to say something is structural, like it sounds so immovable, right? Like it's permanent, but actually what you've just helped me realize is that it's still people, inside the structure that are doing things. And it might be hard, right? You might need to be courageous and work that muscle. But, at the end of the day, we're all human beings inside these organizations, and we're the ones who get to decide, what happens.
That's exactly right. I love that. We hold the power ourselves.
Yeah, important to remember that. Okay, let's switch gears a little bit. I'm curious to ask you about your teaching. Can you give us a little context for, what you're doing now, what you've been doing recently at Angelo State?
Absolutely. So before I moved into a faculty role at Angelo State University, I had a career in higher education leadership. So I spent years in different roles that kind of increasingly led to more responsibility, more leadership, more administration. So, anything ranging from a department chair to dean of certain colleges to the executive dean. So I had some responsibility of whether it was general studies curriculum, career technical education, workforce training. It led to everything from student affairs, advising, being the director of advising, discipline, residence life, athletics, you name it. You can tell the responsibility grew. And so when I came to Angelo State as a faculty member, I brought a lot of that real world context into the classroom with me. And I keep this thought of when I started in a leadership role, I was not that far out of college, this was new into leadership. And so I try to bring all of the lessons that I learned the hard way into the classroom to help. What else can I prepare these students for that they're not going to know starting in leadership? Once I started teaching at ASU, about a year or so in, I was asked to take on the program coordinator role for the administrative leadership program. And what I found when I started this role was that the program was initially primarily based on preparing principals and superintendents. And so my job was to transform the program into something that could prepare leaders in any organizational context. And so that's what it is now. And I'm really proud. I love working in this program. I tell everyone it is my dream job. And every time I teach most of the classes within this program, and my students get really tired of it because I'm like, this is my favorite class. I might be teaching, strategic planning. And I'm like, this is my favorite class. And then I'll teach reframing administration. I'm like, okay, this is my favorite class. I love this class. And so I'm like, I know I said that the last class, but I love it all. And then part of that process was being part of the EDD and Transformative Leadership, which has been an awesome opportunity to really develop an EDD program in leadership that is different for our students and very energizing and a great opportunity to expand my horizons as well within leadership.
Well, that's exciting. I know you've been starting to integrate followership into some of these favorite courses. Give us a little insight into how you think about that.
Okay, wonderful. I integrate followership both formally and informally into each program and course that I teach, and it's very deliberate at every level. It becomes part of the intellectual environment of the course and not just a unit in the syllabus. So, for example, I integrate into our EDD courses that I teach. I typically teach leading transformative change and team dynamics, where the connections to followership are pretty natural and substantive. So, one of the examples in leading transformative change, the central tension that we examine is why so many change initiatives fail even when the leadership driving them is competent and well-intentioned. Followership gives us a really important part of that answer. So when we start looking at Cotter's change model and students are examining major change frameworks, the conversation often centers on what leaders need to do: create the urgency, build the coalition, communicate the vision. But then I'll pose the question, and sometimes it might be a discussion board or it might be an individual email to each student. And I'll say, what is the follower's role in each of these stages? Because a change initiative doesn't succeed because a leader announced it. It succeeds because people at every level of the organization chose to carry it forward or didn't. And so followers are either the transmission system for change or the resistance to it. And they don't get to that place passively. So the reframe tends to genuinely surprise students, and it really changes their focus on, okay, as a leader, I'm doing this, but as a follower, they're impacted this way. And it helps them, especially the students who are managing change in their own organizations at the time. Another informal use in team dynamics, for example, I connect followership to the question of what actually makes a high-functioning team. So we spend time on psychological safety. The students are required to read Edmondson's teaming book. And we look at the work conditions, the conditions that allow teams to learn and take risks. And then I'll ask students to consider, who is responsible for creating safety on a team? What does that look like? The instinct often lends towards the leader. And then we really dive into followership. And we start examining the research on how peer behavior shapes team climate just as powerfully as leader behavior does. And if one team member consistently speaks up constructively, asks questions and reinforces norms of openness, then that behavior becomes very contagious. So we look at it from that lens and the followership behavior producing a team level outcome. So for students who are leading teams in their own organizations, it's a realization and it's practical and useful and it stays with them.
I just want to underline again how practical this all is, even though you're still in a classroom setting. And I think there's actually something about introducing followership to these programs that makes the conversation intrinsically practical and sort of boots on the ground, so to speak, because unlike leadership thinking, which can often be more big picture, a little bit longer term, followership in the act of doing it is very, very embodied. It's very much what you're doing, what you're saying, how you're getting the work done from moment to moment. So I want to ask if there's anything else you're excited about in the ASU program that brings this same kind of practical, real world experience of leading and following to students.
Something I'm genuinely excited about right now is I have proposed for our EDD group. I put forward to integrate followership explicitly in our summer residency. So the residency is an intensive in-person experience where our doctoral students come together to engage deeply with program core ideas. They engage with each other. And I think it's the perfect setting for this conversation. The residency itself is a living example of co-constructing learning. So students are simultaneously leading and following in this situation. So whether they're, in cohort discussions or collaborating in work, there are panel discussions with their cohorts. It's how they show up for each other as scholars and peers. So the opportunity to really name followership explicitly in this space and examine it feels like a natural and powerful fit.
Kinsey, if memory serves, I think you also actually have a specific module on followership in one of those favorite courses of yours, Reframing Administration. Can you tell us about that module?
In this module, students don't just read about followership, they become the trainer. Their central assignment is a condensed professional development presentation where they have to teach followership to a team, whether it's a leadership team or whoever they want their audience to be. They're teaching what followership is. They cover what followership is, why it matters. They characterize the basic styles. They identify attributes of effective followership. And then the next part is really the most powerful. They conduct an organizational assessment and a personal assessment. So they look at their own workplace and identify, okay, what kind of followers make up this, whether it's their department, their team, or their whole organization. And then they turn the lens on themselves and they have to determine what kind of follower they are, honestly. And I think that combination of the outward look and the inward look is where the real learning happens, because you can understand followership conceptually, but still avoid applying it to yourself. And this assignment doesn't let you do that.
That's so cool. I really appreciate the double assessment of organization and self. I can see how that's super, super illuminating. What have you observed in your students over time learning this material?
What strikes me the most every single time I teach this course is how many of my students arrive with virtually no prior framework thinking about followership. So a lot of my students are in leadership roles at some level. But the concept is brand new to them. Like they haven't ever really stopped to think about the role of the followership. And then I have loved watching through this module how something shifts and it's like the light turns on. And so some of the comments that they've made have taught me more than anything. So like a student wrote before the module, they had a latent antiquated perception that followers were just task completers and those who did not possess leadership qualities. And I loved to see the student take ownership and say, this was a latent, antiquated concept. Another student who shared this followership module shifted my view of leadership from being leader-centered to relationship-centered, emphasizing that organizational success depends on engaged, critical thinking followers as much as an effective leader. It helped me see leadership as a shared responsibility rather than a position of authority alone. So I'm seeing students that are not summarizing readings, but they're genuinely reorganizing how they understand the work that they do. I love seeing this light come on like, oh my gosh, why did I not think about this sooner? Why have I not been considering the followership role? It's particularly powerful when a student sees the relational nature of the dynamic and identifies just how much the followers matter and that they actively shape leadership. So one student in the survey wrote, followers do more than just follow tasks given to them. They have a responsibility to collaborate, communicate, and influence the behavior of a leader. And that word influence was really a breakthrough to me. It really stood out because once students understand the followers' influence, that they influence leaders, they can't unsee that. And so that starts showing up differently. And they start showing up differently as followers and as leaders. So from the survey data and from working with these students, it just really inspires me and confirms that the need for followership preparation and to interweave that followership strategically throughout leadership preparation programs because it changes students. It changes who they are and who they're going to be as leaders. And these students are busy professionals in graduate school. Many of them are managing teams of their own. They're telling me that one single module fundamentally changed how they understand the work that they've been doing for years. And that's not a small thing, but that's exactly to me what graduate school or graduate education is supposed to do. So it's super fun to watch these students grow in that way, in that capacity.
Yeah, again, congratulations. I know for me, like that equating of the word influence with leadership always kind of grates on me. It's like a pet peeve of mine, like, no, that's not how it is, so it's so satisfying to hear your students having that epiphany, for themselves and living it and, like literally transforming, how they approach their work. Really, really inspiring. I'm ready to roll this out in every program in the country. Kinsey, so just hit me up whenever. Listeners, if you want to duplicate something like this, where you teach or work, please let us know, and we'll make sure we get you in touch with Kinsey. Okay, what's next for you in your own exploration of leadership and followership?
Oh, that's a really great question. And I look forward to seeing what that looks like too. I feel like I'm at the beginning, like it's just sparked this passion and having the voices of these surveys from the employees that we work with and this, psychologically co-creating psychological safety. It can go so many different places. I really would like to look at the gap between how proactively people are behaving as followers and how safe they feel doing so. And that tension, that I think that tension deserves more investigation. What's causing the gap in different organizational contexts? What leader behaviors or structural conditions most effectively close the gap? I want to look at that too. Our ASU system is part of a bigger Texas Tech University system. I would love to conduct this research within the bigger system as well as another branch campus, Midwestern State, just to get a larger number and look at different organizational responses. Some of the other topics I've really liked to look at is how teams negotiate informal leadership and followership roles, and then looking at followership and organizational culture. Throughout the administrative leadership program that I teach, we do a lot of organizational assessments for different things, and I would like to look at followership and the organizational culture as well. I'm interested in looking at longitudinal studies in terms of like, okay, my students who complete this followership survey and then they graduate and they go in, they continue in the workforce, but looking long term at how are they looking at followership and integrating that in their leadership roles? Are they, what does that look like? I would love to do that type of study as well. I want to keep taking this work to the conference, like the Global Followership Conference, because I believe deeply that practitioner audience needs this conversation as much as the academic one. And the co-creation model isn't just theoretically interesting, it's practical. So I want to keep doing some work with it as well.
Very practical. Yeah, super practical. Well, we will be happy to follow your work for the foreseeable future. Before we close, Kinsey, is there anything else kind of top of mind, right now in this world of followership that you'd like to leave listeners with?
I think just this. I think we're genuinely at an important moment in how we understand leadership. For decades, the conversation has been almost entirely leader-centric, and that framing has served us in some ways, but it has also left a huge portion of every workforce feeling like spectators in their own organization. Followership scholarship gives us a different and more complete story. So, one, where everyone, regardless of title or tenure, has agency, responsibility, and the capacity to shape the culture they're part of. That's the message I most want listeners to carry with them, is you don't have to wait for the right leader to show up before you can start co-creating safety. You can start today with the way you frame a concern in your next meeting, with the question you ask that no one else is asking, with the way you treat the colleague who just spoke up. Culture is a cumulative result of small choices made by everyone every day. And that means every person listening to this podcast is already a culture maker. The only question is whether they're doing it intentionally.
Beautifully stated. Thank you so much for sharing your research, your teaching innovations, your enthusiasm, all very, very inspiring. Listeners, once again, if you would like to integrate followership into your own leadership programs, either in an educational setting or in a work setting, please reach out. We have resources. We have a global network available for you to connect with. You can get in touch with Kinsey through Angelo State University, and you can find that link in the show notes. Kinsey, thank you once again for joining me here, and I look forward to our next conversation.
I love talking about this work and would love to talk to anyone interested, and I really appreciate the work you're doing and the opportunity to visit with you about it today.
You have been listening to the Lead and Follow podcast. Special thanks to Glover Gill for composing our music, and a huge thank you to all of you who support the show. It really means a lot. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with a friend or consider joining the Lead and Follow fan club for as little as $3 a month. There's a link at the bottom of the show notes.